Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings. Welcome, Réka, to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, hi Ryan. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Réka Wilson, and I am a product manager working at Jersey Electricity in the Channel Islands. And I started as a marketer, and through the years, working more and more with customers and customer problems, I became really passionate about user experience. And that's how I made it into the world of product management, and I never looked back.
Great. And what does the digital workspace mean to you?
A digital workspace is everything for me, because collaboration is such a key element of everything that we do. And without digital tools, we just can't really do them, especially in the last 4 years. We could have never gone through it without them. And I rely on a massive set of tools to help me in achieving that and help me and the team achieving that.
Great. What would be your key tools, just so we get an idea of what you're using?
Yeah, so we do use quite a few tools, but I think one of them, the main one that I use is Miro, which is really, it has been a lifesaver, because I always hated needing, after a meeting or brainstorming session, to take everything that we put up and then needing to write it up. It was just such a waste of time.
Yeah.
And also reading your own handwriting after a while, it becomes quite tricky. So yeah, with Miro, especially as in some of my teams over the years, we had teams that worked in different parts of the world, from Bordeaux to Jersey to Canada. So having everyone in the same room is very difficult. While Miro solves that problem immediately. And it's also so easy to use. Some other tools like for diagramming, they've been always just so difficult. Visio is a nightmare for me. Although I do like some of the Microsoft products, this Visio is just, it is very clunky, and it doesn't support collaboration. And with Miro, even using it for voting and things like that, it has been super useful.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm a big fan too. Maybe one day they'll even sponsor us. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Never know.
Yeah, who knows? But I like you probably grew up on Visio being my main tool, and it was very difficult to find alternatives to that. I mean, you've got Draw.io, you've got a few others, and before Miro was Miro, I think it was called something else. We were using it, and I think it was called Rocket something, I think, and it was even then it was a really like just out there, well thought out, clever tool. And I'm amazed sometimes, like when I'm doing a call with someone I'm sharing, like a feature will pop up that I didn't even think was a thing. Like you could do a talk through and record your talk through of your Miro board. Oh, that's like so clever. Like that's amazing. And yeah, we've just built 2 products, and we basically built the entire product using Miro boards.
That's fantastic.
There's almost nothing that sits anywhere else. Okay, yes, now we've had to bring it into Notion, for example, to give it a little bit of a workflow feel too, because Miro's not very good for workflow. But having the ability to put things into frames, to just copy and paste an image, embed a video, amazing from that point of view. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and I don't know if you found it that working in asynchronously, it just supports it so much, because you can't always work on the same thing at the same time. And as you say, it's because you can do everything in it. We have, for example, user personas are built in it, user journeys, all these things that otherwise they would have been between Figma and paper and other documents. Now it's all in there.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll laugh at me, but I actually did I wrote a book and I did some designs. All my designs were done in Figma. I know Figma in Miro, and they said to me, "No, you can do it in Figma." And I said, "No, but I can't do it in Figma. I'm not like Figure's like very complicated to do, but I could just do so much in Miro that the actual images I did in Miro are actually in the book. That's how good a tool it is. Like it's that versatile."
That's really good.
Yeah, so I'm impressed with it. So tell me about what you do on a day-to-day basis, working electricity.
Yes, so my role, well, it is for Jersey Electricity. We are not just an electricity provider, but also looking at how we can enable life's essentials and inspire a zero carbon future. This is our vision and what we are really trying to work hard for. So over the last few years, we've been looking at how we can actually do that. And one work stream is the e-mobility work stream. And I'm leading the product development on that side. When it comes to e-mobilities, obviously there are quite a few aspects, and we started a few years ago by developing a strategy and also looking at what other products are needed for our end customers when it comes to charging electric vehicles. We concentrated initially on that, but we are concentrating on the entire e-mobility aspect going forward. And we have home charging. The team have set up 5 years ago a public charging network, and we are currently working on how we can extend that, invest in it, and just make sure that we are ready as an infrastructure, which we are from a public perspective, but we do want to make sure that we do give it our best and we are there for the customers where and when they need us. So my role is really exciting because I've always was very passionate about sustainability. I worked with one of the biggest international environmental charity, the Jersey Zoo, and it's so important in our lives to do whatever we can. We can't do everything in this, and this is obviously my perspective, personal perspective, is that, but we can't do everything, but we can do little bits. As long as we do our best to do them, we can make a change.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there was an episode I did with Dan a while ago, and I always get the name of his company wrong. But what they do is they look at the companies and what their sustainability is. And then you can do your own sort of sustainability score where you put in, like, I bank with Barclays, I bank with Mira, with Monzo, et cetera, et cetera. And then he will tell you like what your personal carbon emissions are based on who you use. And then he will provide alternatives to bank with, for example, or in the stuff. And I think those little things that we could all do potentially
Absolutely.
make a difference.
Yes, and as you said, Isaac, even through banking, but also even through the platforms that we're using. Because as we were talking about Miro, there's also a lot of companies that have been investing heavily in the last few years on making sure that their processes and everything that supports these software packages that we're using are sustainable to as a great degree as possible. And obviously, like the likes of Microsoft and AWS, they've been having a roadmap towards decarbonization for a very long time, which is great to see, but there's still a way to go.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think with any of these things, you are moving sort of the Titanic of issues because it is big, and no one believes that icebergs exist. And I mean, you can look at anything and find the scientist that supports your view, either for or against global warming. So I think that's tricky. But in the same token, I mean, I look at, like, we buy a lot of food from the grocery store, and you get so much packaging with it. And you just think, well, do we need all this packaging? Like, my recycling bin is full of recycling from food. And I've noticed that when we were in South Africa, it's not nearly as much. And it's just because I know so that the choices are different. I think practically it didn't make sense to have as much packaging for food there. So we don't have as big a recycling challenge, if you like. And it's silly, but it's just it's a big thing when you take it on a scale of 40, 50 million people. If they all have excessive packaging, then it's a big problem. And look at straws, how that's changed.
Yeah. And small changes, as you say. And I've noticed the same. It's interesting what you say about South Africa, because I noticed the same in France. We do go over quite often there, and it's just the amount of packaging there. It's far less than here, I find it. Like even when it comes to just like the usual veg, everything is without packaging, except the salads, which still, like, obviously because it's pre-packaged, but we're not eating salads.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's an interesting thing, and I don't know I think it's France that allows it now, but so I grew up in South Africa, and food waste is not a problem in South Africa. Like, if you have extra food, you can give it to somebody on the street to eat it. Like, it's not, it's actually seen as a sort of public service in some respects. Like, we had, because the unemployment's quite high and there's a lot of poverty and stuff. So if you cook and you've got extra food, instead of throwing it away, you can give it to somebody, literally walk out the door and give it to them. But living in the UK, you can't do that. You're not allowed to. And I know, like, when we used to do catering functions in South Africa, you couldn't give away the catering food per se, because if you made somebody sick because they weren't used to whatever was in the food, there was issues there. But the general household could do what they needed to do. And I think I recently saw something in France where they've allowed you to do that now. So at the end of the day, you can actually sell the food at a much discounted price, even if it's expired, or give it to somebody who needs it, because you don't want to waste the food. Because that's the biggest crime, is wasting food. in some respects. So
Yeah, especially like in the last few years when poverty has increased so much everywhere in the world. And that's very interesting. Yeah, I didn't know about that in France.
yeah, it was recent, probably last 5 years or 3 years. And I mean, we have this issue here at home, like, if we have extra food and no one eats it and we throw it away, we actually like physically feel not ill, but like we really should eat. Like I'll eat stuff just because I'd rather get eaten than gets wasted. But anyway, that's not a digital problem. That's a humanity problem. So I mean, the e-mobility thing is interesting for me because I would have thought by now the amount of electric cars would have actually been a lot higher. Now, again, South Africa has huge power problems, so I don't see electric vehicles there ever. Very few, maybe 5% of I think everything's petrol and diesel. In the UK, if I look outside, I've got 2 electric cars out of all my neighbors, and there's 6 neighbors. So 3 electric cars. So it's not a prodigious thing there. I mean, what's it like in Jersey? Are people moving to electric, or is it?
Yes, people are, and there is a wide concept about trying to be helping towards becoming carbon neutral. However, as with everything, there is also the financial aspect. And as we know, electric vehicles are quite expensive even now. And with Jersey being an island, it
Mm,
is really hard to bring everything in. And the market for second-hand vehicles is still quite in its development, is in infancy. There is quite a lot of work that needs to be done, but there are a lot of organizations that are working together and making this happen. Now, throughout also like in the last period, the government has launched an incentive scheme, similarly to what the UK has done earlier, incentivizing people to purchase to change
mm,
if they need to an electric vehicle. And also there's an incentive scheme when it comes to having an EV charger at home, which all helps. And it is, even if we remove the financial aspect, there are still really a lot of good petrol and diesel cars out there, and it makes sense to change them at the right time and right pace. We do want to support people in achieving when they need it to get an EV and to get the charging as easy as possible. Because if we think about it, yes, the electric vehicle costs a lot upfront, but when it comes to the maintenance of it, even without calculating the petrol and the diesel
mm.
costs, that would be replaced by electricity, which would be considerably lower. The maintenance costs are just reduced by such a large amount that maintaining it's easier, but purchasing it upfront, it is a bit more difficult. So yeah, it is still quite in its infancy, and we do hope that we're going to see a bigger pickup in the next few years.
Yeah, I think it'll come.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a level of, and I'm gonna say petrol heads, but there are people that like the sound of a diesel, sound of the diesel petrol car. I mean, I can't say it's necessarily a power difference. I mean, we had a BMW electric vehicle for about a month, and it was X3 that had been rebuilt as an electric car, and I mean, that thing was amazing to drive
Yeah.
because it was fast off the mark. The weight was in the middle, so you could do a corner like being in a go-kart. I mean, in fact, it was dangerous to drive because it was just
Because
too
of
fast.
the power. Yeah,
Yeah,
and they are it was interesting that over the years there have been so many myths around electric vehicles, and my colleagues, they have been working really hard in trying to bust some of them. And like one of them, yeah, it was the power. But actually, as you said, is that in an electric vehicle, you don't have to wait for the motor to start working. It works automatically.
yeah.
But also, it's like the range. It's a different myth that it is still around.
Mm.
And the newer cars are having bigger and bigger ranges. Like some of them have over 300 miles. Now, with Jersey, such a small island, you definitely do not need that. You wouldn't need to charge for months in a row.
Yeah.
But when you go, like obviously on holidays to the UK or France, then obviously it's a different situation. But even there, the charging networks have evolved so much that you don't have to worry about it. We have like the EV platform that was implemented by my colleagues earlier in the year. It has roaming partners all
Mm.
throughout the world. So you don't
Yeah.
have to download multiple platforms and use them. You can have just one.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, I was impressed with that. Just with a little bit that we drove around. I mean, pulling into a parking at a supermarket and you charging there for while you're shopping. I mean, I don't think I've actually ever went lower than 90% in all the time we had it, because it's a funny kind of anxiety in a sense, because you always, every night you get home, you make sure the car's plugged in. even though it's at 95% or something. And the next morning it's at 100%. You're like, okay, cool, that's done. But then it's weird because now you don't pop past the petrol station anymore. So you don't pop in for like going to we have a Waitrose by us, so at the Shell. So going to the Waitrose at the Shell, but you're not putting in fuel is like a weird experience because now you're not there for your main purpose anymore. Now you're there for the secondary purpose. And there were the charging points there now as well. So that's a really thing. And I spoke to a few people that were taking electric vehicles on long distances into Europe. And the only gripe that I sort of picked up from them is not so much that there weren't enough bays. It was more a case that some of the vehicles didn't have the fast charge capability. So if you're doing 300 miles and you were stopping, you would need to wait an hour for the vehicle to charge up enough to do the next leg, which is fine if you're going to stop for lunch and we've got kids, so you want them to run around, stretch your leg, etc. But if you're a businessman who's trying to, or a businesswoman trying to get somewhere quickly, and filling your car up takes 10 minutes, that 50 minutes is a problem. So,
Yeah. And technology has evolved in the last period, and the newer cars, they do support it. But it's interesting that you made a really valid point about how customer behaviors change, that you're anxious about making sure that it's charged all the time, even if it is at 95%. And it reminds me a little bit of when we initially had the mobile phones and we were like, I just don't want to run out of it. And customer behavior and the way that our psychology changes, because this is so different from a petrol charging, is really, really exciting to see. And it's a big challenge of changing that for us as users, and for me as a product manager is a really, really interesting challenge to see how we can motivate and make people understand that you don't have to be that worried. 95% will probably last you, depending on your vehicle, either 60 or 200 miles.
Yeah, and that was the thing that I struggled with. And obviously, I only had one car, so I can't say this is all the cars. But with a petrol vehicle or a diesel vehicle, you kind of know how far you can go. Like it's a week before I have to fill up, or whatever your activities are. And we didn't have that feeling with the electric car, which we would have probably got over a period of time. If this is probably a very minor thing for all the benefits of driving the vehicle. The thing that I loved about that thing was it was so smart that I could tell it every morning at 7 o'clock, you need to start warming up. So by the time we got in the car at 7:30 to take the kids to school, the car was ready to go. You're literally getting, you turn on whatever. The safety gripe I actually had is the car was too quiet. And we have an electric car in our neighbor across the road. And her car, you can't hear it. And I actually said to her, I'm pretty sure there's actually a law that you have to have a certain noise level for the vehicle because of pedestrians. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it's probably the gripe that you get because people want that noise that you used to when you're growing up.
That's it. And it's going to take some time. I know that I've read articles in the industry that some automakers were actually looking at adding on a noise, mainly because of this, that people needed psychologically that noise to make sure that they understand that. Because when you hear a car, you don't have to see it. You just know that it is a car. With an electric one, it's so silent that we don't have that connection in our minds yet. So it's going to be an interesting one, and it's going to take quite a while, I think, until we all get to comfortable with the different aspects. And from product management perspective, this is going to be great for car manufacturers because it is like constantly challenging them to make sure that they provide a product that not just that it answers the question from getting from point A to point B in a sustainable way, but also is like how it answers all these other questions from a consumer behavior perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it is the ultimate product challenge because you've got so many interconnected things. And I mean, the safety thing for my son, he's 5. He rides his bike, and I keep explaining to him, you've got to watch out for cars. And he goes, yeah, but I can't hear them. I said, yes, I know. Now, you say, I don't hear them, and then therefore I don't need to look for them. I'm like, no, but you're missing the point. You've got to now look for the car because you can't hear the car because it doesn't make a noise. And it's difficult even for him. And he's growing up in this era where electric cars exist. They're commonplace. In fact, from a school point of view, I don't want to say brainwashing, it's not the right word, but they are enforcing that electric cars are the only option. So he's now looking at our cars going, we need to have electric cars. And I'm saying, well, we don't have to have electric cars because we've got the most fuel efficient, low emission vehicles on the road. So, we've done the right thing in that respect. Now, what's interesting for me around that is their education is not taking into account like that some roles require different vehicles to do different things. So I still think you will have a level of petrol diesel engine that'll be hybrid, for example. Our vehicles are hybrid. It's a diesel with with an electric motor, and it self-charges. So it's not just a case of everything has to always be all or nothing. It could be combinations of things. And I mean, my other car's got a hydrogen thing, not a hydrogen, sorry, liquid gas. I've got 2 tanks. And the liquid gas thing is amazing because one, it costs half the price as petrol. And I know we're going to be much of a car discussion here, but I found the power I got with the LPG to be that little bit better than petrol.
Well, that's interesting.
And I was surprised by that because it's the same engine processing 2 different fuels, and I would expect it actually the LPG to be worse. And because I find LPG gas here worse than in South Africa, not as strong. But I actually get a little bit extra oomph out of it. So it's just an interesting bunch of choices, I guess.
Yeah. And I think, again, like having my product hat on, is that giving customers choice on what they want to achieve and what their needs are is key. And education over time of what is the best way for your own needs and for the planet's needs is very important. Things are not always black and white.
Yeah.
I used to think that things are very black and white, but over the years, the more that you work in product management and marketing, you realize that actually there are different colors.
Well, and it's about sequencing sometimes. Some things happen in a certain order, and you've got to start with a little win and then it becomes a bigger thing, for sure. There was something else I wanted to ask you about, which I was saying. I can't remember what it was now. It was what you were saying before I said explaining the safety thing with my son. I mean, well, maybe on a renewable side, I mean, how much renewable energy are you guys bringing in, and how is that affecting your approach in this space?
All the energy that we bring in is renewable.
Oh, all of it? Okay. Wow.
Yes. Yeah, it is something that the company has been very passionate about because obviously it is so important for everything. And one thing that I really liked in the company when I joined just over a year ago, and it was the fact that they are not just, you find a lot of companies that love to talk about sustainability very loud, but not necessarily everyone walks the walk to the full extent.
Yeah.
And with Jersey Electricity, I found that actually they do care a lot about that. They care a lot about a few things, but sustainability is one of the main things, and diversity and inclusion is another one. It's just so important on the agenda, which is obviously really good, considering the new generations that are coming up. It is going to be very important, and with the sourcing of electricity, they have been very clear about that.
Yeah.
And also, like within our team, within product management, we have a solar team looking at different types of solar energy. There are different discussions about how we can support this and looking at energy efficiency. We have a team that's working on that, on home heating. So we are looking from a totally different perspective at everything as how we can support the sustainability side.
And is your majority of your energy from solar and wind, or have you got other stuff as well?
No, it's majority of it is imported from France, and it is based on nuclear.
Oh, nuclear as well. Okay. Oh, so is nuclear considered sustainable? I suppose it would be clean. Yeah. I mean, fusion would make sense, because I thought maybe you would have some tidal as well.
Yes, there have been discussions over the years. However, at the moment, the challenge with tidal is that it is before its infancy. And we are in Jersey, we're in a great place because we have one of the largest tidal movements in the world. But the technology, because it's not quite there, and making sure that we find the right solution for the right place, it's going to take a lot of time. And within the last period, like both the government and also our Jersey Electricity have been looking a lot at also the wind. Because again, as an island, we have plenty of it.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, it's funny. We were in Mossel Bay recently, back in April. I was there for 4 months, and that's on the edge of the coast, and the wind there is phenomenal. But because you have sun, most houses have solar, and the UK has done the right thing in the sense they've mandated you have to do 1 kilowatt of solar energy with every new build. So each house has to generate their own. South Africa is not mandated, but most people have to because of load shedding and poorly maintained power supplies. But I mean, is Jersey mandating that all to houses and businesses, or?
No, not from my knowledge.
Yeah, because it's interesting. So like in South Africa, and it was actually an article yesterday, I think. So where I grew up in Johannesburg, there's a couple. It's a brand called Macro, but it's basically the Walmart. They're owned by Walmart now, but it's the sort of like a Costco. And what they've done is they've covered all their parking lots. So you can imagine sort of a kilometer square parking lot with a roof of solar panels, plus on top of the roof of the store. And that basically powers the entire, because I mean, South Africa gets a lot of sun. So you can pretty much power the entire building on solar power. And it's a huge expense. But actually, if you think about it from a return on investment point of view, it's a huge return because they're basically off the grid.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because we went to Disneyland in Paris earlier in the year, and they have the biggest solar array over their car park. It's just massive. It goes on and on and on. There are some videos online about it, but when you see it in person, it's just like you feel so tiny in it. But I really appreciate it because, as you say, is that it is a massive expense up front, but it supports them, and especially in areas where you don't have 100% sustainable energy, it just supports both the sustainability side and everyone's lives.
Yeah, and it's such a, I mean, it's such an obvious thing. Like you have all this sun. I remember, and this is a terrible reference, but when I first started watching the first Superman, when Christopher Reeve was still Superman, and his arch nemesis was his brother, who was made through the power of the sun, and he'd lose his power if he didn't have a thing. And even in those days, I was thinking, why don't we, as a kid, thinking, why don't we use the energy from the sun to power things? I mean, solar panels weren't even I mean, they're probably being thought about, but not really built. And I can't believe how efficient they've become. I think the first one was like 20% collection, and now they're at like 40% or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the latest that is, but
Yeah, I must admit, it's like I don't really know the detail. I have a team that are really, they are
I'm
the
sure.
best at it and they know it. But there are a lot of, and you make a valid point that it has such a big opportunity, the sun itself. And there have been over the years a lot of organizations investing in solutions. There are some really interesting and solutions within Asia and Arabia of actually harnessing this without the standard solar array. And it is gonna, from my perspective, like I see as all of this is growing. Having solar panels is probably just the start. But obviously, as I said, I'm not the expert on the
No,
solar
sure.
side.
Well, and to answer the question, so originally they were 15 to 20% efficient. Now they're at 42% in most cases. And the best one they got is 47.1%. Now, what's interesting about that for me is that the combustion engine is about 50% efficient as well. So it's kind of an interesting correlation in some respect, because the one is free energy and the other one is, pulled out the ground and manufactured and all that kind of stuff. But to your point around future stuff, I have seen a couple of things that were interesting. One was a brick that could absorb solar radiation and turn that into energy, and a panel that's basically see-through glass, so you can't even see the collection panel. Now, I don't know how close that is to production, but that is crazy. If you think about all those glass buildings that exist,
That's exactly it.
or glass in any building in your house, crazy. Great. I'm pretty much good for there. I don't know anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I know that we've talked a lot about e-mobility, and we haven't necessarily talked about like digital, well, the tools and technology. So it's up to you. Like
Well, I
better.
think
It's like what fits what you envisage for it.
I mean, I think it's all related. In fact, that was what I was going to say to you. So the interesting thing that I've been trying to do for ages, and I finally did it, is because I mean, I come from South Africa. I grew up in Johannesburg, where even in winter, it's warmer than the UK. It can start at -4, but it could be still 20 degrees by lunchtime. So when we moved here, obviously paying for heating and gas and all that kind of stuff was quite an expensive. It was still cheaper than, it was still cheap in those days compared to now. But one of the things that always bugged me is if you've got heating running in your house and it was always this dumb heating. So you'd set your dial to 19 degrees or whatever it was, and then the house would just basically sit at that temperature. But you couldn't turn your heating off or on or anything like that, because in those, when I moved here, that you didn't have a smart sort of thermostat. You just had what you had. And then of course you had Hive come out and you had all these other ones come out. So this week, and this is why I'm excited, because I finally got my intelligent house working. So now if anybody opens a door or window, heating turns off. And when they close the doors or windows, the heating comes back on again. And then it's also geofenced. And I've been sort of playing with it for a couple of weeks, and I've actually seen like a 20% drop in my energy bill. It was very I did it very analog, in the sense of running with timers. And now that I've got the smart things working, now it's done based on event. So I'm interested to see what the future will hold in that respect. But just having the 20% reduction because when we were back in South Africa during COVID, my energy bill was like £70 a month. We came back, and it was that period where everything just went a bit crazy, and my bill went from like 70 to like 350. Now it's kind of gone down again, but now there's talks of it going up again. And this is why I wanted to get it working, because I think that's the important part of this sort of chain that we talked about, where, as a supplier, you can provide the energy all the way down the line to your business, or to your business premise, or your residential premise. But the person or the people that run those things need to also do their part to be as efficient as possible. And the smart meters help, but it's also the internal stuff, like turning on off unnecessary appliances, turning off aircon if you don't need it, and heating, etc., etc., so all those things. And I was curious to know how far you guys went in that regard, from maybe it's just education and guidance to almost providing smarter technology in the house.
Yeah, no, very interesting point. We do have one of our product teams is actually focusing on energy efficiency and how we can find new products, new solutions that would help customers in this. Our technology team has been looking also at the likes of Nest, and we are selling it within the shop in the Powerhouse. But we have been looking a lot at how we can support customers, especially through the last few years. As you said, that things have just gone up, and the wages didn't necessarily keep up everywhere. And the team have been really putting on a big effort on looking at how we can help people being energy efficient. And our comms team have launched not long ago a new campaign looking at energy efficiency with a great new face. It's called Mow the Slow, who helps people out and provides that educational part. And I think like that is like putting a friendly face and helping people understanding how these things, as you say, just switching things off at the right time, not having your heating on when you have the windows open, not filling up your kettle to the extreme when you just need one cup of tea, the little things. The little things add up. As we were saying also at the beginning of our chat, is that every little counts. You don't have to do everything at once. You can start small and just add on bit by bit. And our team have been concentrating a lot on that. And we hope that we are going to be able to help more and more people on Ireland with that.
Yeah, and I think to a large extent that's education. And I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. He's got this thing about tiny houses, which is something he's involved in, where they're almost 3D printing. So this friend of mine, they're manufacturing, or they're basically 3D printing to an extent tiny houses. And I was quite interested in this because, I mean, I've watched a few YouTube videos ages ago, but I actually hadn't taken into account some of the stuff they're doing. So the whole thing for them is so when you go build a house now, instead of getting brick and mortar and cement and insulation and all that stuff, they basically give you a wall that has been pre-built. And that wall has already got all the wiring in it that it needs, all the insulation it needs, and it's got special connectors to connect it together to create your house. So you can create, it's not all meant to build a 6-bedroom or 12-bedroom house, but it's meant to build a reasonably sized small house. But what we were talking about is, if you go down that route of modularized housing, and this is obviously, one of the videos I had watched was an Elon Musk thing, going to Mars and all that stuff. But if you go down this route where you're now using specific materials and going, the conversation around solar panels and solar glass and all that stuff, your sustainability goes up, because you're now able to, you build that house, you live in that house, you need to extend your house. So, we've got kids, so we need to have more rooms than the average 2-person relationship. So we need 4 rooms, for example, or 5 rooms. You could just add on the module for the extra room, and you get your different spec of wall. So 3 meter, 4 meters, 5 meter. So you wouldn't necessarily get the 3.5 meter, but you'd get pre-built walls that you can just plug in and build. And I make it sound really easy, but it's not, there's obviously some cranes involved and whatever it is to build a house. But what we were saying is that you could go and expand your house while you've got the kids there. And when the kids leave, instead of moving to a downsizing house, you sell off the walls and the components, conceivably to be recycled, to go build new walls. And what he was saying is that the materials they're using have got like a 200-year lifespan. So
that's great.
In theory, I mean, there's obviously, who's going to check it in 200 years. But the point being is that if you were in the market to go and, let's say you go build a hunting lodge or a thing in the middle of the wilderness, you're not going to necessarily go buy the brand new materials. You go buy a couple secondhand walls and you go build it there and then see how it goes. And if it goes well, then you'd probably invest more. But that whole concept, because if you look at an average house, that's been built 100 years ago, the insulation, the all that stuff is so bad. A lot of those houses have to be gutted and redone, and that, obviously has a huge cost implication. So most people don't do it. And really, the best thing to do in those cases is to flatten it and to build a new house, which again, you think. But if this concept came along, and you look at, as I say, South Africa, there's a huge amount of informal housing, which is basically shacks that are made out of corrugated iron and wood and whatever else they can find. And we'll forget about the corruption side of things, but to go build these tiny houses, which is why this conversation came up, because he's also from Africa. Your concept of giving people a roof over their head, a sustainable roof over their heads, repurposing materials like those corrugated iron sheets are part of the wall anyway. So they would have materials the thing, and you can teach people how to build the walls. This is the other interesting thing, is that some of the walls are actually almost like kits that you can go and buy. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's I don't know the name of the products and stuff like that, but how that's come along. And we were just saying, like, if you had a piece of land and you wanted to go and build 20 houses, your time to build 20 houses is basically limited by the number of walls you can build in a factory. And they literally are, because they're so repeatable, you're literally just building 100 walls a day. Yeah. So you could build a house in like a month.
And the modular design, it's so important. Like, obviously seeing it from products and in software products that I worked with before, we always try to be as modular as possible. And it's like in real life with these things, it actually has such a massive impact, as you say, because you can, and I really like that idea of, like, you grow it until while you need it, and then you can just downsize it when you don't need it. Really like that idea.
And initially I thought, when we talked about it, was all rectangular square. He said, no, they can do stuff at angles too. So you can have a 45 degree or a 49 degree angle and stuff like that. And then the roof, the way they do the roof, that's the part that's difficult to make reusable. That kind of fits whatever your layout is. Yeah. But if you stick to a really rectangular thing, then your cost is then kept low, because it's just rectangle, square, whatever it is. And then the way they do that is basically just panels in a row that they connect up, and then that's the part that it has to be weatherproofed and all that sort of stuff. So it's very difficult to reuse that part as it stands. But it's still reusable stuff. You can still recycle it. You can melt it down and that stuff. So it's a fascinating space. So I'm very curious to see how that goes, because there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, for simpler houses and more componentized houses, which goes back to the smart stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to see, like, one of the reasons why I love working in product, whether it is in software, as I've done before, like working on identity verification products and location verification, up to even the websites that we were doing and apps, and now working in e-mobility. It's all just like everything, because of where we are from an innovation perspective, everything is pushing towards becoming better, more sustainable, more mindful of what our needs are and what each other's needs are.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things that I love about what I do, and the user-centered design approach to it, because we can really make some great things and do some change in the world, do our little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's in some respects, it's a very daunting, overwhelming thing. But then if you break it down into the small bits, which is really what product management to me is about, breaking down to very small bits and putting in the right order, then you get great results. So awesome. I'm interested to see what you come up with, and I'd love to, if you ever have anything you want to share with us to have a look at, please do.
Thank you. We'll
keep in the loop.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we will.
Super. So if anyone wants to get hold of you, what's the best way?
Email in general, it's good, because I do have a lot of meetings, I must admit, so I can't be necessarily but get hold a lot of the times on the phone. But yeah, by email, it's absolutely fine.
Okay, so we'll put your email there, and then obviously LinkedIn as well, if they want to look you up.
Yeah. Email or LinkedIn. Yeah, that's probably the best.
Well, it's been great having you on, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ryan, for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.